Welcome back. You are listening to Nate the Hate on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And with that, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, Modern Vintage Gamer.
Hello, Nate. How you doing? How's things going today?
Things are going well. It's exceptionally hot, but it kind of matches the topic we're going to be talking about right now because this is a hot topic. A report or a number of reports came out just a couple of days ago discussing Gamescom and Nintendo's presence there and how there may have been a couple of tech demos for the Switch Successor, or what some will call the Switch 2. And this has been going around the internet on all forms of social media. A lot of discussion has been taking place, and it's our turn to talk about it. And there's a few things I'm going to add to this conversation that those reports had omitted. And I'm going to be quite curious how you, as well as the community, reacts to some of this new information.
I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of chatter about this stuff, so yeah, let's waste no time. Let's get into it.
So Gamescom came up just a couple of weeks ago in Germany. And naturally, this was one of the biggest industry events for the entire gaming community, where developers were able to meet in person for really the first time since GDC earlier this year. And naturally, what comes from these events? Conversations. And what do conversations lead to? Media and others hearing about this type of information that is shared at these conventions and industry events. So naturally, something like the Switch 2 was going to be a conversation point for a lot of people there. And this is also a good opportunity for Nintendo and partners to bring tech demos to demonstrate exactly what this hardware could potentially offer when it comes to market. So as soon as the Gamescom convention came to an end, media and others began to reach out, see what the birds were singing in terms of information, what was the chatter going on at Gamescom. And two reports had surfaced this week, one from Eurogamer, the other from Video Game Chronicles, better known as VGC. And we're going to open with the Eurogamer report, where they put out that one of the Switch 2 demos that was shown at Gamescom was a souped up version of the Switch launch game, Zelda Breath of the Wild, and how the demo was designed to hit Switch 2's beefier target specs. And they did note that this was just a tech demo, and there is no suggestion at the moment that Breath of the Wild will be re released on the Switch Successor. Now, they didn't go into really any additional details beyond this, but this report definitely got things going, and people began to react to why would you show this type of tech demo? Why were you showing Breath of the Wild with better resolution, better frame rate at this type of show? And some of the speculation had led to individuals saying, does this confirm backwards compatibility? And I think that's kind of an odd conclusion to make here.
Yes, it is. Absolutely is. But please continue.
So I do have a couple of things I'd like to add to the Zelda Breath of the Wild report that the Eurogamer article didn't specifically say. To my understanding, yes, Breath of the Wild was shown at Gamescom. It was shown running at 4K and 60 FPS, and this was paired with DLSS, and that is NVIDIA's AI upscaling feature. It's very impressive. We've seen it on PC now for a couple of years, and it's nothing short of magical. And we've also talked about DLSS over the last couple of years here and what it could really achieve on Nintendo hardware and how they will benefit from it if implemented on their hardware. But there was also another significant element that the Eurogamer report had omitted, and that is one of the key focus of the Zelda demo wasn't so much that it was running at a higher resolution and better frame rate. The actual focus of the demo was to illustrate improved load times. And when you played Breath of the Wild back on the Switch, going from the main menu to an in-game save, it would take you roughly in the area of about 30 seconds. Now, that's not a terrible load time. But in the world of the PS5 and Xbox Series X, 30 seconds could now feel like an eternity, right?
Absolutely.
So when they were showing Breath of the Wild on the Switch Successor, or I should make it clear, a Switch Successor in terms of target specs, what was shown here was a smooth transition from menu, fade, right to the game. Load times had been erased.
Wow. So you're talking about some type of significantly enhanced storage um, that goes way beyond what we've currently seen with the current Switch. Whether that
Correct.
is, I think you mentioned 3D. Did you mention 3D NAND?
Yes, a few episodes ago, we did talk about that.
Interesting.
Now,
Well,
I mean, this is a tech demo. We have to keep that in mind.
Well, that's what I was going to say as well. So, you know, I kind of tweeted about this a couple of days ago because usually when something like this happens, when a hardware maker gets developers into a room and shows off some demos, it's like you said, it's really there just to kind of show off specific features of hardware. So what you're saying is, yes, there is obviously enhancements to resolution. There is DLSS that's in play as well. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Do you know what version of DLSS is running? What was said to be running? Because I asked because there's kind of differing thoughts and opinions, but I haven't really seen anything concrete, whether it was 3.1 or 3.5 or whether there was frame generation or not. Do you have any more info on the DLSS stuff?
So, yeah, it has been a mixed situation.
Mm-hmm.
You do have reports out there that were saying the original report by VGC, which had mentioned 3.5, but it was edited out, was incorrect. And the account had said it was DLSS 3.1 is the accurate
Right.
version. To my understanding, what had gone around Gamescom was that DLSS being used was 3.5, but it may not be utilizing the full feature set of 3.5. So there is the potential that something like frame generation may not be being utilized on the Switch Successor, or it wasn't being utilized in these specific tech demos.
Right. Right.
So there's a little uncertainty on that front at the moment, but technically there shouldn't be anything preventing DLSS 3.5 from being featured on a Switch Successor.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
So right now, yeah, a little uncertainty on that. If I had to hedge my bets, I would go with 3.5 because it's just simply, a more advanced version of DLSS. The benefits are definitely there, and it would be something that developers can take advantage of.
Yeah.
Now, something like frame generation, it not being there isn't that big of a deal because you're still getting advanced in terms of upscaling technology,
Right.
giving frame rates. Well, not frame rates per se, but you're not going to be able to take a game with the frame generation and radically outperform what you'd be getting at that base level.
Right. I mean, even with the base kind of temporal upscaling, that alone is, a significant enhancement to what we currently have on the Switch, which, the best thing that we can get is obviously FSR, right? And there are, FSR is, I guess it's very, very similar to that as far as upscaling. But, if we are indeed getting 3.5 or a cut down 3.5 or whatever, a mobile 3.5, that's pretty big to hear. And you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, DLSS is really just there for improving performance, and I think it's one of the secret weapons, honestly, that Nintendo has up their sleeve that I think will give them, a really big advantage going into the next generation of hardware, where they do have DLSS technology at their disposal, and I think that's really big for them.
Yeah, it's definitely something that Nintendo and third-party partners and such can utilize in significant ways. And it being that base level feature for the hardware is going to just pay dividends for them because you can now come in with a piece of hardware that doesn't have to compete necessarily with either series system or the PlayStation 5 in terms of raw power to be able to remain competitive. By having DLSS, you can use that upscaling technology to get a rendered resolution that can pair fairly comparable to what those systems are outputting natively,
Yeah.
but not having to do it natively. So it's going to close the gap in kind of a cheaters type of context, if you
Right.
want to put it that way. And in a lot of ways, this is kind of that technology for the future. And it also makes comparisons or discussion points in terms of how is it going to compare to these other systems moot? Because raw power is no longer the defining factor where you can look at it and say, okay, here's the teraflop number, here's
Exactly.
the RAM, and
Yep.
we can say, well, this one outclasses it. Because now it's something like DLSS factored in, those comparisons really have no weight anymore. And you
Right.
could almost go back to the GameCube, Xbox, PlayStation 2 generation of comparisons, where you had the GameCube come in at 6 to 12 million polygons.
Yeah.
PS2 was 66 million polygons. And then you had the Xbox coming in at around 120 million polygons. The
Hmm.
issue was the PlayStation 2 66 million was a theoretical maximum and it wasn't real world performance. When
Yeah.
it came in terms of real world, it was closer to about 5 million polygons. But when you looked at just those theoretical numbers, it would appear as though the GameCube was radically outclassed, which we now know was not the case. The GameCube was superior to the PlayStation 2 in a number of ways,
Oh,
except
absolutely. Absolutely.
and, yeah, and the Xbox was truly outclassed the two of them and maybe never really took full advantage of the power that was under the hood at the time because the PlayStation 2 was the market leader. But it just shows that you can't take numbers as gospel. You
Yeah.
have to look at feature sets, engine support, and so many other factors now because as gaming has advanced and technology has advanced, there is more than a teraflop number. And that's something that has been talked about for a couple of years now that flops alone do not dictate the power of a system. You have to look at so many other things: CPU, RAM, feature sets.
Yeah.
That's how you can determine the true power range of a system. And with the Switch 2, that's something people are going to have to consider. It's not going to be as powerful as a Series S when it comes to raw power, but it's going to have more modern technology. And that's where it can put up a fighting chance to compete with those more powerful systems when it comes to resolution and maybe even frame performance in some cases.
Hmm. So I want to talk a little more about this load time stuff because I think that's really interesting to hear
Mhm.
you say
Absolutely.
that. And look, obviously, if you look at the load times on the Switch, they're not the best, right? I mean, they're okay, and I think we kind of got spoiled when the PS5 and the Xbox Series came out because you've got things like quick resume, and you've got, for the most part at least, most games load very, very quickly. I think that's fair to say. There are some games that have a seamless kind of gameplay experience, and
Mhm.
you don't even realize the game's loading at all. For example, even Demon Souls, when it first came out on the PS5, was one of those games that
Mhm.
was just was fantastic. And same thing with Ratchet and Clank, and even a game like Returnal, I feel like has very, very minimal kind of loading. But the Switch, obviously, because it is old hardware, it's been around for a while now. You do notice those loading times. You do notice those loading times in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I might add. And I think one of the things Nintendo did as a stopgap measure, if you will, was to overclock during loading. So the trick was to basically reduce all the clocks on the GPU and then boost the CPU clocks to as high as possible so it could kind of process and load its data as quickly as possible. It was kind of a trick that a lot of developers actually use. I actually use it myself with some of the things that we're doing. And while it does help, it wasn't really a viable option, right? And I think Nintendo quite rightly has identified that they also need to get better loading performance from their next generation hardware. Not to say that they need to compete with Xbox and Microsoft and Sony, I should say, but rather they just need to come up with a streamlined approach to loading times because look, the reality is whatever comes next, at least from what we've heard, we're talking about 4K. We're talking about better visuals and things like that. These game sizes are going to get larger, right, by a certain magnitude. We don't know how much larger they're going to get, but I think the days of like 10 gigabyte games are going to be in the rearview mirror. We're going to start talking about 40 gigabyte games and 50 gigabyte games potentially, maybe even larger than that. So I think getting ahead of the loading performance now is the right move. Now, what have they actually done in the hardware? Well, we'll have to wait and see. But I think, that's very, very interesting to hear that they also did kind of demonstrate, little or seamlessly loading in a game like Breath of the Wild, because that's pretty big.
Yeah, I mean, and that was really the key focus of the Breath of the Wild demo, was just showing that it went from the menu to the game without the loading splash screen.
Mm-hmm.
And just having that simple fade to menu to game.
Right.
That is quite the improvement over what we currently have. And there's a few examples of some, Switch games that do have very quick loading, like Super Mario 3D All-Stars is near instant.
Yep.
But it's not at the same scale as something like Breath of the Wild.
Right.
So to really demonstrate that is really indicative of what Nintendo and Nvidia are prioritizing with this hardware. They are aware of how the industry is moving forward, and that load times are becoming a relic of the past. And if you want to compete in the modern market, you have to make sure you have these new standards of gaming.
Mm-hmm.
And as load times become more of a hindrance, and I use that term loosely, but you can't have two systems on the market that have very quick loading and then come in with new hardware that has what would feel like an eternity, even if it is only 15 seconds compared to 1 second. You have to remain competitive on that front as well. So to demonstrate Breath of the Wild having that just instantaneous fade from menu to game is a strong demonstration of what can be done with this hardware. And I think that's more impressive to me than seeing and hearing that Breath of the Wild was being shown at 4K 60.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see what you say there. Look, we kind of assumed we had some idea that the next hardware will have enhanced visuals. But yeah, Nintendo focusing on loading performance and the way that they store data is very big. And it also tells me that, they've got some new tech, obviously, that we'll find out about in due course. But, it's very exciting to hear that. Like, I still have a lot of questions about how much this thing's going to cost, but I mean, I think we're going to just kind of stay the course right now and just kind of talk about these reports rather than speculate. I think the time will come for cost predictions and things like that once we know more. But very exciting to hear that we're going to get some good performance on loading speeds as well.
Now, the other report that came out that day was from VGC, and VGC had supported the Eurogamer, and then they went a step beyond, where they were citing their own sources who claimed Nintendo showcased Epic's The Matrix Awakens Unreal Engine 5 tech demo, which had originally released and was shown on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S back in 2021, and that this was running on target specs that would be comparable or similar to that of the Switch Successor.
Right.
So that means when it was shown, it was not running on an actual Switch 2.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been, and this would be my own speculation, it could have been running on a PC with comparable specs. It could have been a video that they were using just to showcase what they had achieved on a dev kit.
Right.
But it wasn't shown to them on native hardware.
Interesting. This one isn't. I read about this article as well, and I got quite excited to hear that they did demo the Matrix, because I remember when I actually did download that thing, it was very, very impressive. But what I'm seeing online, Nate, is people now are starting to make assumptions about how powerful this new hardware is, kind of what you were talking about before, where it's not just about teraflops, But people are starting to say this thing is going to be more powerful than an Xbox Series S or X, or a PlayStation 5, because it supposedly ran the Matrix demo better than the PS5 version. I think that's a very, very dangerous assumption to make. Like you said, we're not really sure what it was running on, what kind of specifications it was, and if it's using DLSS, which almost certainly it was. Let's be honest, it must have been, probably with frame generation as well. I mean, it's just one of those things that, as you said, the hardware, it's not about raw performance. It's not about being first on the graph or on the bar chart. It's about being smart in key areas to make performance run exceptionally well on a hybrid device at either a handheld resolution or a docked resolution. And I think that's essentially what this demo was trying to demonstrate. And based on everything that we heard about this Matrix thing, it sounded like it demonstrated very, very well.
Yes, it definitely demonstrated well. And the VGC report did note that it was running with DLSS enabled.
Mm-hmm.
It showcased ray tracing. And they had made mention that the visuals were comparable to Sony and Microsoft's current gen systems. And they did make the citation that it does not mean the Switch Successor will sport the raw power anywhere close to those systems, as we had also discussed. Now, for this demo, I have been told that, yes, it did showcase very advanced ray tracing that was identical, if not better, than what we have seen on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series, at least in terms of the Matrix demo. So it may have surpassed them in terms of ray tracing implementation in this demo specifically.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that as well. I mean, obviously that Matrix demo, like you said, has been around for a while. It's been about 2 years. I think, was it 2021 at the Game Awards, I think, when they unveiled it. So it's been nearly 2 years, right? So I guess the other thing is, am I right in saying that when before the Switch release, the NX, there was an Unreal 4 demo that was going around?
Yes, they did the Elementals demo.
That's right. So, I mean, it's almost like this was always going to be the case, that Epic will circle back with Nintendo and show off some new tech that they've got running on their new hardware. So, yeah, very, very exciting to hear that. I don't know what it means though, as far as, are we going to start seeing the floodgates open with UE5 games coming out? I mean, we talked about Unreal Engine 5 in the last episode, where we still felt like it was very, very early days yet. There's only a handful of games that you can count on literally one hand that are available for UE5 right now. But it is very exciting that it seems like Epic is kind of preparing at least, some type of version of UE5 running on next generation Nintendo hardware. That's very exciting to hear. And I'm sure developers are very excited to hear that too.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if this particular demo was just a means of showcasing that the hardware is UE5 compatible, and when paired with DLSS and such, look at what you can achieve.
Yeah,
and
I mean, if you've got that middleware, you basically look. The thing I've learned about Epic and Unreal Engine is when they show something, it's either to investors or it's to the public. You know what I'm saying? Or to developers. There's always a reason why they're showing something. It's kind of beyond marketing. It's like, we're making a statement here that our engine is already ready, up and running on new Nintendo hardware. So if you're ready to jump on board, we'll be ready with the tools on day one. That's what they're saying. They're basically saying Unity and all these other engines, Godot, whatever, they aren't ready for new Nintendo hardware yet. I mean, they might be. We don't know, right? And UE5 is available if you want to start making your games.
Right, and that's the thing. And when you showcase something like the Matrix Awakens tech demo, you're showcasing not just that tech demo by itself. You're showing that UE5 can run at this level of fidelity that, as VGC reported, is comparable to the PlayStation 5 and Series X demo.
Right.
But you have to keep in mind this is DLSS enabled. So it's a good demonstration of not just UE5, but how UE5 plays well with NVIDIA's own technology and feature set that the Switch Successor will be employing.
Right.
So they're saying, look at what you can achieve with DLSS with this engine. So if you're using Unreal on any of your upcoming projects, you can achieve this too. You can get something that is right along lines with that PlayStation 5 or Series X in terms of resolution. I'm a little uncertain about what frame rate this particular demo was running at on the Switch 2.
I would be surprised if it was running any faster than what we saw on the Xbox and the PlayStation 5, which I think was around 25 frames per second. And that's not to say, it had anything to do with performance, but I feel like it almost had that kind of filmic movie aesthetic about it, where they just kind of left it running at that kind of frame rate.
I mean, that's a very impressive demo to just being able to showcase all this type of technology, DLSS, Unreal Engine 5 on a hybrid platform. And if you're a developer who is developing a game using UE, you're going to look at this and say, okay, I know what we can do. Now, there would obviously and naturally come questions if you're a developer saying, well, what is the native resolution that this demo was running at without DLSS? What type of performance were you getting when DLSS was disabled? And those are questions we do not have answers to right now because that wasn't the purpose of the tech demo. The purpose of the tech demo was to show the Matrix with DLSS on this hybrid system and what can be achieved.
Yeah.
And it was very promising results.
Yeah.
And from what I was hearing from individuals who had seen it, they were very impressed by what they had saw.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's a promising story if you're looking to the Switch 2 to be, visually competitive with the PlayStation 5 and Series X when DLSS is enabled.
Right.
And if that's going to be that base feature where every game can utilize it, you really have this little magic box that's just going to continue to punch above its weight.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it demoed exceptionally well. And look, as a developer, Nate, I'll be honest, I'm very, very excited about what was reported on. I definitely want to learn more, and hopefully I will when the time comes.
Now, that was the big stuff that came out of those two reports. And there was other talk around Gamescom as well, beyond these two tech demos in relation to the Switch 2. And some of it is definitely a curiosity that I haven't been able to get full on clarity on, but I do want to make mention of it here. And that is there was a lot of talk at Gamescom about March 2024 and the Switch 2.
Whoa. You mean a release date? Or
that's one of the things I don't have clarity on.
Okay.
I don't know if March 2024 that was being discussed at Gamescom is referring to a release date, a release window, or the potential of a reveal window.
Okay. I mean, March 2024, that's not something that I had on my bingo card. I mean, I think I've mentioned in the past where I felt like it would be the second half of next year. And I'm just, I'm making that assumption based on the fact that I feel like developers need at least 12 months, roughly at least, to, to get familiar with hardware, to get things ready to go. But with that said, let's kind of explore March 2024. I mean, let's assume that there was some type of release, right? Let's just kind of rip the Band-Aid off. I mean, Nintendo would have to announce something, I would say, pretty soon, I would think. And I just can't see, we never really had Nintendo announcing anything this year because we want to get, Mario Wonder and all these games out of the way first. We don't really want to disturb the landscape, especially now that they're, doing these Mario Kart bundles again for the holiday and all that stuff, right? So I think this year is well and truly about the Switch and not about next generation. I think next year is absolutely about next generation. But then the question is, if it's March 2024, when do you announce this thing? In January? That seems a little I don't know. It's hard for me to put my head around announcement for a system that's what has a 3-month release window or something. I mean, that's I don't know, but
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Is it was mentioned at Gamescom more than once. This was a talking point. This is a thing people were hearing.
Interesting.
And the issue kind of is that it lacked specific context. If it is a reveal in March, I think most people would agree with that. That kind of makes sense. It's the end of your fiscal year. You have likely sold that 15 million forecast of Switch for the current fiscal year, and now you're preparing, moving into 2024, of introducing a successor later in the year. So you want to reveal it, and maybe give it that 6-month marketing cycle. Now, if it is a release in March of 2024, as you were saying, Nintendo kind of has to talk about this hardware in the near future. Otherwise, it's going to have a very limited marketing window and lead up, which they feasibly could do. And I know people will bring up the original Switch, that the Switch was announced in October, released in March. We had the major showcase in January. But you also have to keep in mind that Nintendo had officially announced ambition and intention to release the successor to the Wii U, at the time known as NX, to release in March of 2017. And they had announced that in April of 2016.
Yeah, it was almost a year before.
And typically what we see from any hardware manufacturer is they do announce intentions of whether they're working on a successor or intentions to release a successor anywhere between 10 to 12 months. That's what Sony had done with the PlayStation 5 before they had officially shown the logo and such. They were very open with investors, where they had mentioned we will be releasing the successor to the PlayStation 4 in the calendar year of 2020. Microsoft had discussed a little bit about the successor of the Xbox One in a similar way. And then we had the official reveal of this series at the Game Awards in December of 2019, releases 11 months later. So this would kind of be an unprecedented situation of there being no official communication from the company to investors or the consumer base that they have active plans to release successor hardware in the immediate future if the Switch 2 is to release around March of 2024. Like, currently we are in the beginning days of September, and officially Nintendo has not announced intentions to release a successor to the Switch. Obviously, it's going to happen. We know it's happening. We've discussed the dev kits being distributed. We're currently discussing the tech demos that were showcased at Gamescom, and Tokyo Game Show is just around the corner, where likely more communication will be relayed to partners by Nintendo. So how is Nintendo really going to play this hand? Because no one's ever played a hand like this before, unless you want to count Sega with the absolutely abysmal rollout that they had with the Sega Saturn.
Ooh, bad old days. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just hard for me to wrap my head around a March release. But look, I mean, Nintendo may have their own plans, but let's entertain March for another second. And let's just forget about logic and reasoning for a minute. What game do you launch with in March of 2024? Is it the rumored 3D Mario game?
I mean, that's a fantastic question. Maybe you launch with Metroid Prime 4 as a cross-gen release.
Wow. Well, that's yeah. I mean, Metroid Prime 4 is that one game that we still don't really have any visibility on. There's a lot of rumors going around, and I'm not sure how substantiated they are, but a lot of people believe that it's a cross-generational game that will drop on both systems. Nintendo has certainly done this before, so why not do it again? It's possible. It's possible, but I think, if you dropped Metroid Prime 4 and a 3D Mario game, and then you had NSO available to everyone that has a Nintendo account and an NSO subscription, and potentially some games that were brought forward by patches, maybe that Breath of the Wild that you were talking about previously is available as an upgrade or something like that. I mean, that's still very, very compelling as a launch, I would say.
And it's an interesting thing. And I want to be clear how in the past, when we talked about release window, I would say, the informed speculation I was having was the second half of 2024.
Yeah.
The discussion of March at Gamescom is not informed speculation. These were actual conversations. March of 2024 was the specific time talked about.
But to be clear, you don't know.
I don't know the context of what 2024 means.
Could be an announcement. It could be a release. It could be whatever.
Yeah, it could be that window where maybe they are telling partners to try to finish up projects by the end of March because they are planning a hardware launch a couple of more months down the line. Let's say, June.
Right.
Because this did happen with Sony, where Sony were telling some partners, submit your games by mid-September if you want to have it as a launch game on the PlayStation 5 in November. Because they wanted to make sure they could go through lot check and the certification process. And if you needed to have any bugs or issues addressed, you had reasonable time to get that patch and such done, and you could still make launch day. So it could be Nintendo setting that type of deadline because they are planning to launch the system a couple of months later. But at the same time, they could be planning to release the Switch 2 as early as March of 2024.
Well,
I know it's a lot to take in.
That really is. I mean, I still am. I'm, if I'm walking in, to throw some money down and place a bet, I still have to say it's late next year. But I mean, if you're hearing this kind of March 2024 thing, that's interesting. That definitely throws, a wrench in the works type of thing. It's not really anything that I'd heard of before.
And this is something I have been looking into since Gamescom, trying to get clarity on what March of 2024 means. And I just don't have that clarity right now because I'm still kind of getting the confirmations that yes, March 2024 was talked about. It was mentioned several times, but what it means is simply that's the answer I don't have right now. It could be the reveal timing. It could also be the release window, but it's something that we now have to pay attention to and really take notice of how Nintendo is approaching the remainder of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be interesting. I mean, I still am in the camp. Look, things can change very quickly, but I'm still of the belief that this year is about the Switch. They're getting the holiday bundles. They're getting the Mario Kart bundles. The Animal Crossing Switch Lite bundles are getting prepared. There's Mario Wonder. There's Mario RPG. There's still a bunch of stuff that's coming. I mean, there's probably going to be a Direct in September. Let's be honest, right? There has to be. Well, not has to be, but we're confident there's going to be.
Yeah, by the time this episode airs, the Direct will be about 3 days later, if not announced. By the time the episode airs.
Well, there you go. You heard it here first. So yeah, I mean, I think this year, 2023, is about the Switch. They're not even going to acknowledge anything.
I would love to agree with you, but just upon hearing this March window discussed at Gamescom brings me great pause.
It does, doesn't it?
It just kept coming up, and the fact that I could not get clarity on what it represented just brings me to that moment of maybe it can launch in March. It would just be a very tight window. It would be a situation we've never seen any company try before. But then on that same token, on the flip side of the coin, a March reveal also makes a lot of sense. Yep. If that is what March is being positioned for, it's just that flip of the coin. Which one is it going to be? Launch or reveal at this point?
A reveal, I can 100% see happening. 100%.
Yes.
A
And I think,
release? Ooh, that's tough.
and I mean, I think
Tough to
it's,
commit to.
I think a big thing to keep in mind is this is the hardware side of the industry. It's incredibly fluid. It is dependent on so many cogs and gears moving at the right time, be it production, software being ready. Though this could have been the communication going on at Gamescom, it doesn't mean that this plan doesn't shift in another month or so.
Right.
So it's going to be one of those cases that I'm going to have my ear to the ground when Tokyo Game Show comes around and see, does March come up again?
Yeah.
Because if March is going around Tokyo Game Show, hopefully it gives better clarity as to what it was demonstrating, be it a reveal or a release window.
So at Gamescom, Nintendo did have a presence in the in the business area. They had a pretty big section
Yeah,
kind of closed
big
off.
square.
Are they going to have a similar presence at Tokyo Game Show this year that you were aware of?
I believe they do have some business meeting rooms, but I don't think they have a floor presence in the sense of like a business cube on the
Got it.
floor. I think they just have their meeting rooms within the convention center itself or in the outlying area.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. I guess all eyes are on Tokyo Game Show now to see if any more information comes out or if there's any corroborating information or even any contradicting information potentially that may come out. We'll have to wait and see. But I think, look, there is a lot of smoke here, Nate. I think it's only a matter of time before, we start to hear something from Nintendo. But yeah,
Yes.
I would say as a betting man, I'm saying we're going to hear about it next year. And maybe March 2024 is when we're going to hear about it.
Yeah, right now, March is definitely a point of curiosity, and it's one I am looking at with great focus. So,
Whoa. You said focus.
then it's not called the Nintendo Focus.
You paused and said focus.
It's not called a Nintendo Focus.
All right.
Now, another thing that did go around Gamescom a little bit was naturally the discussion point of backwards compatibility. This has been a talking point for a while now, and there's no clarity to give on it right now either.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that people may be confused about, especially when Eurogamer mentioned the Zelda demonstration, the Breath of the Wild demonstration, there's a I guess maybe an assumption there potentially that could be that, oh look, this is running on new hardware, so backward compatibility is implied. But the reality is it doesn't really answer that question for us, because this demonstration was most likely highly curated. It was running native code, so it wasn't running, under some type of emulation layer or wrapper or anything. And it was there, as we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, to show off specific technical features to developers so they can get an understanding of what the hardware looks like and some of the things that they can leverage when they start to build their next generation of games. So I want to kind of nip that in the bud and say we're not really any closer to answering the backward compatibility question based on this. And hopefully we'll learn more about backward compatibility at a later stage.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing. The Breath of the Wild demo, as mentioned, the focus was about the load time being erased, of just going from the menu to the game with the splash screen gone, just that simple fade, boom, game. It wasn't there for any other reason aside from showing the higher resolution and frame rate, but the focus was that load time. And the demos shown at Gamescom, it was really about what can be done on this hardware. It wasn't going to be about all of the features like backwards compatibility. That wasn't a talking point really at Gamescom. The talking points were these tech demos and what was shown and represented on these demos. So whether there is or is not backwards compatibility will be something that is shared in the future. Maybe it's a talking point at Tokyo Game Show amongst partners, and we can get a report out of an outlet, or maybe I'll be able to hear something. But at the moment, there is no further clarity on it. As we discussed in a very recent episode, the Switch 2 needs backward compatibility. It is a feature that they must have, and I would be very concerned for the system from a consumer level if backwards compatibility is not a feature on it. So it is something you and I both are adamant about it having. We just cannot say with 100% certainty that it will be there in a physical and digital format, but hopefully that answer is known in the near future. And I mean, that concludes everything that I had been hearing from Gamescom and that I can add to the VGC and Eurogamer reports. So going back to the Eurogamer, where they had mentioned the Zelda tech demo running at a higher resolution and frame rate, I can add to that report that load screen or loading was essentially erased from the menu. The splash screen was gone, which is a menu fade to the game. And then with the VGC report talking about the Matrix Awakens demo, I've been told the ray tracing was quite advanced and it matched, if not surpassed, what was shown on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series Matrix demo. And, a lot of exciting things. And then we have that window of uncertainty when it comes to March of 2024. And it's something we're all going to be looking towards now, whether it's a reveal or a release. And, a lot of exciting things are happening. A lot of discussion is going on. So things are moving. And this is the start. A lot more will be happening likely in the very near future. We're going to see how Tokyo Game Show goes and see what industry chatter suggests in just a couple of more weeks.
I'm excited. This is going to be an interesting next 6 months or so.
But on that note, we can now go to the Streamlabs questions for this week. And our first question comes from the Puppies in Pink, who donated $10. And they write, Nintendo seems cemented as releasing hardware off cycle compared to Sony and Microsoft. Will this be a continuing strategy that will increase sales? Will Sony and Microsoft still release hardware around the same time, directly competing with each other?
Yes.
Yes, I would say Nintendo is going to continue to do it. Nintendo beats to the rhythm of their own drum, and Sony and Microsoft are they just happen to be in sync when the hardware comes. They also use the exact same company, AMD. So they always want to have the best technology that AMD is producing. And that naturally means they're going to release next to each other. Meanwhile, Nintendo is currently partnered with NVIDIA, but Nintendo likes to do whatever they do. They do their little thing and it works well for them. Maybe one day all three will find themselves in sync again, but for the foreseeable future, Sony and Microsoft may continue to be, mostly day and date until, maybe Microsoft makes a change where they kill a generation off early again and they try to launch a year in advance. It worked exceptionally well for them during the Xbox 360 generation, but who knows what the future holds. Then had a $5 donation from Necro Banana. This is a question you may not have the answer to, but have you heard any rumors about Atlas possibly bringing games like SMT4, Dragon's Crown Pro, Odin Sphere over to the Switch? I know they asked about them in surveys, and that's about it. I have not heard anything to that effect, but I would love to have Odin Sphere on my Switch.
I haven't heard anything about it either. Good game on the Vita, though, Odin Sphere.
It was. Dragon's Crown was also good.
That's
on
a
the
great
Vita.
game on the Vita.
I think it wasn't it cross-play? Like if you had the Vita version, you also had the PS4 version?
I believe so. I
think so.
That was
maybe misremembering, but I think so. Then had a $5 donation from Goat816. Hypothetically, if everything we heard thus far is 100% true, what is your expectation for third-party developers, Western and Japanese, and the launch window for Switch 2? How different could it be from the Switch? I think you would have stronger support from the bigger studios out of Japan and potentially Western partners. Because if the Switch 2 is doing as we've discussed this episode and the prior reports, there's no reason for a company like Capcom not to give native versions of Resident Evil 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, Exoprimal, really anything that they've gone multi platform at this point that was deemed too visually
Yeah.
advanced or performance advanced for the current Switch, where they had to rely on cloud releases. So that opens up a large variety of potential releases from Japanese parties. In terms of Western support, though, outside of EA, the Switch had a lot of Western support. So I think it would be a bigger thing on the Japanese side where Bandai Namco could feasibly bring something like Elden Ring to the Switch, Armored Core 6, games like that would now be possible to bring to like the Switch 2. And given that those launch windows are typically port heavy, at least for those opening 6 months, I mean, wouldn't it be something to have Elden Ring within the first 3 months of the Switch 2 launch?
That'd be pretty sweet. You also think we would get a native version of Kingdom Hearts 3? That'd be cool.
I mean, it would definitely open the door that Square Enix could look at that and now consider it as a viable option.
Right.
So, I mean, really, it would just come down to the company viewing the situation and saying, do we think this game has selling potential now, or do we want to focus on our more current releases or upcoming releases instead of relying on our backlog of games that maybe we brought to the Switch via the cloud or we just had omitted entirely, but may not have that much market relevance anymore. But if the Switch 2 is coming in like these tech demos suggest, I think the Switch 2's generation is, I mean, it can be something that we haven't seen on a Nintendo platform in terms of third party support since, I mean, I don't want to say since the Super NES because the Switch is admirable in terms of third party support. So it could match, if not surpass, what the Switch currently sees.
Yeah.
And with, that magic of DLSS, you're not going to have those visually impaired releases anymore. You can have games that are going to look good, even next to those PlayStation 5 and Series X versions when DLSS is used. And if it's using DLSS 3.5, the consumer, when you look at the images on a screen, they may not be able to discern the difference, at least just to the naked eye. Yes, when comes time to do that analysis work and really break it down, you might see some difference in the resolution when it comes to comparisons. But ultimately, does the consumer care about that? They just want to know the game looks and runs well. And there is great potential that the Switch 2 is going to perform admirably in that area. NVIDIA is very talented in what they do, and there's no reason to doubt NVIDIA bringing a top of the line SoC loaded with DLSS and other features for Nintendo and developers to take at full advantage of. Yep. So exciting times.
I agree. And we'll be playing Warzone on our Switch 2s next year. I'm excited, Nate. We're getting Call of Duty finally.
We'll see. Need to see how the online is implemented on the Switch too.
That's true.
Before we have to use like our phones or something. We then had a $5 donation from Aronson. Hello to both of you. Love your work as always. No need to rush out a precise answer if you're not sure or too risky to say, and because I know you still investigate, but do you have an idea on what new gimmick next Nintendo's console could play on? At the moment, I have not heard of any new gimmick for the hardware. Whether or not that means there isn't a new gimmick, I could not say. I assume they will have some sort of gimmick. I had seen some of the rumor going around about it having a camera, but the implementation of the camera was not disclosed. So maybe there is an augmented reality feature that the system will take advantage of. But at the moment, it may just be, a Switch that's better.
Yeah, I was going to say, does a Switch that doesn't drift its Joy-Con sticks, is that a gimmick that we can say? Because I feel like they're going to address that.
I don't know if that's a gimmick as much as just an improvement.
I wouldn't know what the gimmick would be if there even is a gimmick. You know, part of me just feels like, I don't want to say Wii U, you know, but like part of me just feels like they're taking everything that the Switch, all the strengths of the Switch, improving on them and adding some new features as well, like DLSS, for example. So I think that alone is enough to get people excited about new hardware.
You see, that it wouldn't be so much a gimmick to the consumer, but that could be the gimmick of the system itself, is that this would be the first hardware that utilizes DLSS at a base level.
Right.
And it's more so the gimmick for developers
Well,
than it would be the consumer, because the consumer is just going to get a fantastic looking and running game, and they don't care if it's DLSS achieved. They see the end result.
what if the gimmick is, and I'm using air quotes, but the very first hybrid 4K system? Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, that's marketable. You can put it on the box.
Mm-hmm.
Because imagine, I mean, you could come out there and say, yeah, you got your Steam Deck, but
Yep.
look at us.
Steam Deck the Steam Deck runs at 800p.
We outperform the Steam Deck, even though potentially, and again, this is in air quotes, the Steam Deck and the Switch 2 could theoretically be identical in terms of raw power.
Right.
Well, that DLSS 3.1 or 3.5 is going to be that magic. That's going to be that difference maker. And, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. But that's the final Streamlabs question for this episode. If you'd like to support the channel, we have a Streamlabs link in the description below. Donate any dollar amount, ask a question. We will answer it at the end of the episode. Donate $100 or more, and we will dedicate the episode to you. And with that, I'd like to thank MVG for joining me as always.
Always a pleasure, Nate. And good discussion tonight. I got some things I'm going to think about after this episode.
Yeah, there was a lot to go over this episode. I mean, we were able to share some new information with people, and I am interested in how people respond to it in the comments section below. Let us know what you think about the lack of a splash screen for Breath of the Wild, just going from menu to game in a simple fade, or what you think about the possibility of the Matrix Awakening have better ray tracing on the Switch 2 than that of the Series and PlayStation 5. And then the final one, what do you think about that March 2024 conversation point? Is it the reveal? Is it the release? Let us know in the comment section below. And until next time, continue to embrace the hate.